All right, we're picking up in section 11 now in our tutorial document, and you can see the focus here is on views. And then from views, you're going to see that we're going to transition into some more complex stuff here soon. Although the tutorials keep it pretty simplistic, which I like about them, so that you can focus on the new thing that you're learning. Um, and we are going to be creating a new project here right off the bat. So go ahead and close your work from the previous section, and then go ahead and choose New Project. And has been pretty normal for us here under C#, under Web, ASP.NET Web Application. And in this case, they would like us to call it, I'm moving the document over. My screen switching isn't so smooth tonight. So this is going to be the MVC View demo. And I'm going to be storing it out on my cloud drive, as I have been doing. And hopefully you guys are kind of catching on to that. Trick is really kind of a good plan for this type of work. And then we're going to go ahead and click OK. On the next screen, we're going to stick with empty, but we do want to have the folders and references for MVC included. No unit tests at this time, and no authentication is required. Go ahead and click OK. All right, and then once we have the project up and running here, we're going to right-click the controllers folder, choose Add, and add a controller. We do want to choose empty once again, as we have been doing. Then go ahead and click the Add button to take us to the next screen. We're going to call this our home controller, and we'll let that build. All right, now we're going to do a little bit of editing here. So we're going to leave the index alone, just going to return a view, but we are going to add a method that will be public, will return a string called my controller, and they're not doing a camel case, which is a little weird, but I'm just following what they're doing, so it's a lowercase c. Set of parentheses, set of curlies, and then inside here we are going to return a string, and what they typed was, hi, I am a controller. And then a semicolon at the end. So your code for this file should look basically like this. Now I'm noticing in step number 9 here, and I'm just bringing it part of the way over, but you notice when they're calling the URL, see this? How there's a capital C here? Does anybody anticipate problems? Well, you might anticipate problems. Go ahead and do a Control S to save, and then once you've done that, folks, go ahead and run the application. What they're going to have us do, once it loads up, is go to home/mycontroller in camel case. Oh, and I'm not doing anything. Is that bad? Well, I'll tell you what, Tom. Let me type in the command that they want here. Now what is happening is we didn't write anything for the index view. So of course it throws an error, right? I mean, if you want to throw something in, you could, but I'm not really worried about that because that's not the point of the exercise. But notice that even though I typed in capital M, capital C, and the controller was capital M, lowercase c, it still pulled it up. So there's a little bit of translation that's happening there. And that's actually completely normal. So Let me close the browser here so the server stops running, and then I'll leave the code up here for a second so you guys can make sure that you got it copied in correctly. Okay, so now we're on step number 10 at the bottom of page 65. And it says here, before adding a view, let's add another action, which will return a default view. So what we're going to do is we're going to add another method here, right underneath here. So it's going to be public, and it's going to be an action result, and this will be called my view, parens, curlies, and then inside here, we're just going to type return view with empty parentheses and a semicolon. And really what we're doing is we're just preparing ourselves for the next step. Make sure you save that file. All right. Now the book tells us to go ahead, and here's where I'm going to save us a little heartache, right? To go ahead and run the application and go to this URL. And if you want, go ahead and try it. But you should get an error. Why? Because we haven't created anything to go with it. Right? Right, okay. So I don't need to run the server to prove that to myself. So I am going to move the PDF back over to the other screen here and continue on. So now I'm going to go to step number 12. And this is the part that's kind of neat. So this is maybe a new thing for you guys, and I don't know if I demonstrated this yet. And if I did, I apologize for not remembering. But basically, now that I'm inside this document, so I'm in a controller, and I've created an action result for my view, right? So we're implying that we're going to create a view. And I want to create a view to go with it so that when I do go to that URL, something actually comes up. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to right-click anywhere within that structure. And notice at the very top of the right-click box, what does it say up at the top? Add a view to go with it. Well, thank you very much, Visual Studio, for reading my mind. And for right now, when the dialog box comes up, we're going to leave the view name to match the controller action. And we don't need a model at this point. Well, frankly, we haven't worked with models yet. So, but if we did have a data model attached to it, we could pull that in. And we don't have to worry about any of the extra checkboxes. In fact, you want to uncheck use a layout page. Now, little food for thought here is if we did have a layout page created, so in other words, think of like master pages in ASP.NET, regular ASP.NET. So if we already had a structure in place where our whole site's built on it, or like certain pages in the site are built on it, we could indicate that page there, and then whatever content we add to this page will just drop right into that structure, right? We don't have that created, but if we did, that's where we would select it. Go ahead and click Add. And then you're going to notice that we've generated a view. Now, we talked about views in lecture before, but haven't really manipulated it too much. But notice what happens here. Because we're not using a layout page, so like a master page, it puts in the complete HTML structure for us because we're not basing it on a different page. We're just building a page. Okay, so we need the doc type. We need all the standard HTML elements in order for the page to work. Why? Because those are the rules of HTML. Notice at the top how we do have a razor directive, and it indicates layout equals null. Why? Because we uncheck that box. Simple as that. Now, could we manually come in here later and if we have a layout page and add that page in? Absolutely. It's not a big deal. So even though it's already been created, it doesn't mean that we can't change it. All right, next thing that we're going to do is somewhere inside this div that's going to hold all the body content, you might want to put in some HTML, and all they did is they put in straight text right inside the div. I'm not a huge fan of doing that. I'm actually going to create some sort of a structure. I'm going to call it an H2, and it says, hi, I am a view, and I'll do all caps on that to be obnoxious. Okay. Go ahead and save that. Notice the file extension that we created though, up here in the tab. Even though we are creating a full HTML file, it's still reading as a CS HTML file, not a straight HTML file. Okay, so that's a pretty important little thing. Go ahead and click the run button and let's see what it does. And it's on my second screen, so it's coming back. And yay, it ran. Now why did this automatically come up? I never typed this before, right? In fact, I skipped the version where it crashed intentionally, right? So that implies that if I type the root URL, okay, so why did this one launch directly to my view? The reason for that, folks, and if you're wondering, is because I was on this file when I launched. If I launched from here, it would change it. Let me demonstrate. Of course, second screen. All right. So by launching right from an HTML file, it tries to bring up that file. In this case, really what they wanted us to do is to land here and then type home my view and then bring it up. Did you guys all get that to work? Great. All right. That actually completes section 11. And before we jump into the next section, which is on data models, so this is going to be kind of our introduction to models, I do want to actually pause the video and take a break here in class. And then what I'm going to do preemptively before going into the next tutorial is I want to jump over to our book and just point out a couple of really key concepts before we do the tutorial. And I'm not going to spend a significant amount of time there, but just a little bit. So 5-minute break. All right, we're back from our break, and we're going to jump back to our main textbook at this point to kind of review some concepts before we just start doing tutorials. Our book is written around this whole MVC music store tutorial, and this is kind of at the point in the book where I decided that this book isn't really effective at doing the exercises, which is why I brought the tutorial document into the mix. But it does cover the concepts really well in terms of why it's important and how the technology works. So there are examples in this chapter that if you wish, you could follow. In fact, I think what I'm going to do is I'll make it an extra credit assignment if you want to try to complete the work in this chapter from the original book. So I'll probably make it worth probably a point or two, I'm thinking. Chapter 4 in the main book. So in this chapter, they do go back to that whole music store application. And they talk about what are the important takeaways here. And one thing that we're going to learn about here is this last part of the MVC that we haven't yet been informed about, which is this concept of a model. And I know that I've mentioned several times what a model is indicative of. It is really indicative of a structure for data and not necessarily the data itself, although it could include the data. And that's kind of a weird thing to talk about that way, because really what's happening here is the preferred way to work in an MVC architecture, instead of like connecting to a pre-existing database, is if we're building an application from scratch, we can actually imply database structure with code files and then have the application build out the database for us. And that's really kind of a weird and kind of uncomfortable way to do this type of work. Because really, in the past, what you've learned is like you'll have either a flat file, XML file, a text file, or a database that you pre-connect to and then you do your work, right? And you've created tables and stuff like that. And sometimes you even use your code to create the tables. Like you send SQL commands off to the database to create a table or to insert an entry or update some information or delete a record. So in this approach, though, we are really using a much different type of approach. And what's really fundamental here is this concept where we see scaffolding really kind of blossoming into something really important, especially when it comes to this database stuff, because the scaffolding can build out the database for us, and it'll do so based upon the code that we write that implies the database structure. So I want you to think about all those things I'm talking about before we proceed. So one thing that they have you do here is they walk kind of through a tutorial where you create the application, right? And these are things that we've been doing all along. They do it in a slightly different way than we do. Like we've been doing empty ones, and they actually use the MVC structure where the bootstrap is thrown in. Not really that much of a conceptual leap there. But now what does happen is once you have that structure in place, we will create a file for that application. So this is the file that they create. So inside the models folder, they create a C# file that is very simple in its content, right? And notice what it does. It creates a class file that declares a bunch of variables, basically. It includes their data type. And notice there's also the keyword virtual in there, right? Which implies that it's kind of not real yet. Okay, so think about that. And then we go through and you think about like what might be in a music store database. Like if you are putting together a music store application, why do you go to a music store? To buy an album or a CD or a tape, right? But we call them albums, right? So an artist creates an album and they release it. And so you can see that we have an integer field for album ID, and then one for genre ID, one for artist ID. And notice how in C#, if you want to create getters and setters for any item inside of a class that's going to be instantiated, all you have to do is say get and set inside the curly brackets, and it creates the getters and setters for you. You don't have to do like in Java where you fully express it, right? Or if you get smart and figure out that you can right click and create them automatically, right? So C# kind of has like a weird little hybrid that way. Beyond those three ID fields at the top, we then start to set up some stuff related to an album, which is the title, the price, a URL that's going to point to the artwork, and then the genre and the artist that created the album. So, if let's say it's an AC/DC record, the genre would probably be rock or hard rock or something like that. And then, the title, whatever the price is, and then, of course, if you have that created. Now, this approach, where we set up a class file like this, is really unique because the MVC structure in Visual Studio is highly intelligent. And what happens is we are creating basically a table here. And I want you to think about this. So if you have a table that holds album information, and then you notice here that, okay, well, that album's got an ID. Okay, that makes sense, right? Some unique identifier. But then notice that we have secondary IDs. And just by virtue of the fact that it says ID in the variable name, Visual Studio goes, oh, wait, this sounds like it might link to another table. In fact, we're going to create a separate table for genre and a separate table for the artist. So we're going to have one table that holds all the artists, one table that holds all the different styles of music, and one that holds all the albums, right? So one artist, for example, could have many albums. And one artist probably has most of their stuff in one genre, but who knows? There's people that, do country and Western, right? Joke. Not a very good one, but you get the point. So there's an implied connection to other tables. So what would happen then, and I don't know if they show it here, and they sure do, is they have a separate model that they're building for artists, and that just has the ID number and the name of the artist, and then there's going to be a separate one for the genre. Now, when I build these files into the model folder, and then we run the application, the scaffolding engine will recognize the fact that these models have a connection. They have fields that are named the same. And not only will it build each individual table, but it will link them together. That's pretty incredible, actually. Not only will it link them together, but it will also automatically provide the mechanism, if we tell it to include operations or links or mechanisms where we can add new records, delete records, update the records, or insert all the CRUD operations, right? Create, retrieve, update, and destroy. And it does so automatically based on that simple little bit of code that we're seeing here. Now, if you think about what that does, right, this is a lot easier than writing SQL statements, right? Creating the table, specifying the data types, and then after you've created the table, you specify how they're joined, what's the primary key, what the relationship is, one to many, many to many, who knows, right? It does all this automatically. So this approach to building data models is called code first. And it really, as far as MVC is concerned, it really is the preferred way to work because it allows a programmer to define database structures without really writing any SQL code at all to handle any of the interactions that happen in the database. So really what's happening is we have kind of sorts a database abstraction layer. And for those of you that have done the Ruby on Rails class, some of you have, some of you haven't, you've heard this terminology before because that technology does a similar thing. It uses MVC, slightly different way, but it also prevents you from actually writing the tables manually. Okay, so this is kind of weird and uncomfortable at first, I will tell you that. But this whole concept really, we've already been doing the scaffolding, but it builds, the whole concept builds off of scaffolding pretty strongly. So what I would recommend that you try to do is, if you want to try this example, go for it. You know, it's not really that hard, but you do have to follow the directions. But when you do the scaffolding, so far, when we've been running our applications, we've been choosing empty controllers, right? Because we haven't had any data models to connect to. But once you do have a data model to connect to, then you can start using some of the other options. And if you look at what they do, so you can create controllers that have read-write actions, or ones that allow you to do connections with what we call entity framework, which is kind of like the big tool. And the entity framework really handles all those databases interactions for us. It is the abstraction layer, basically, that allows us to create that seamlessly based on our code. And those are things that you might want to know for midterms and finals. I'm just telling you what those options are. That's a little note. The other thing that happens is that when we are working with the scaffolding in the entity framework, Microsoft has created a kind of secondary database connection language. It's not SQL. It's very SQL-like. And if you took the Intro to Programming and Database course when you started your program, and you may have, I'm not really sure, where you probably learned this in Visual Basic and you got to the end of your book and then you did a couple of database chapters, and there you would have to write what they call link queries, right? Which are very SQL-like, but they're not quite SQL. And the entity framework uses that approach to do its work with the database. So that language is all based upon this thing called object relational mapping. But underneath it all, it is still SQL really driving all the commands. The intent here is that when you're really a database programmer, they kind of like to separate the application stuff from the database stuff. Because you can make a whole career out of doing just database. And in fact, if you want a really rewarding career, database is a great choice because it pays really well, because not a lot of people know how to do it really well. All right. And a lot of it is because a lot of developers are moving to these approaches. Now I did mention that the approach that I just pointed out, it was a code first approach. We write the code runs, and the database gets built when we run the application. It'll recognize, hey, you don't have a database, let's build it. Where's the instructions? Oh, here they are. And they just look at those few class files, links them all together, and boom, you're off and running. Just like that. Now you got to think about how an ASP.NET application works, which is a lot different from a regular HTML application. When you put a regular HTML application out on the web, you're taking a collection of files and you're just putting them on a server. It's true if you're also doing PHP or Java stuff, right? They're just kind of static in nature. There is some stuff going on in the back end, but those files are created and they don't really execute until they're called upon. ASP.NET MVC is a little different because we are using C# code. So C# code actually does get compiled. It is not an interpreted language like JavaScript or PHP, which runs on the fly. It actually is converted into binary code on a Windows server, and you're running the binary. You're not running interpreted code. So once that application is put onto a server and launched, that one time, the database is built, and then it's there, and the application just keeps running. You don't need to recreate it. That does create some issues when we're working with the data, though, in terms of being able to see what's in the database, access the database, and sometimes you actually have to blow the database away and recreate it with the stuff that we're doing, just so you're prepared for that. But there is actually the model first approach or the database first approach. And really, model first equates to code first. We're creating the model in the class files. And then the database first approach, which is the old-fashioned way, right? We have our database, put all our tables in, we design the database, and now we're going to create a front-end application to tie to it. Here's where we diverge. We're declaring the database in our code. MVC can work with a database that pre-exists. You just use different tools and approaches. Okay, so I think that's really probably enough of a background to get us back over to the tutorials, and they have a bunch of different stuff here, and I'll let you read the rest of that chapter on your own. But for now, we're going to jump back over to our tutorial document and pick up in section 12 with the data model. Now, I'm hoping that some of the stuff that we just talked about will help to clarify what we're about to do. And really the stuff that we're about to do is much more simplistic than what's in the music store, especially when that music store gets built out, but it does really get the concept across pretty clearly. You can see right off the bat, we are going to be creating a new application, so please go ahead and close whatever solution you have open in Visual Studio if you have one open. If you're just starting from scratch, no big deal, but we are going to create a new project here, and we're going to use the same selections that we've been using all along. So Visual C#, Web Category, ASP.NET Web Application with the .NET Framework. This one we are going to call MVC Simple App, per the book. MVC Simple App. All right, put it in an appropriate folder. Go ahead and click OK. All right, and then we're going to get to our next screen here. We're still going to choose empty with the MVC core references. We're not worried about authentication or unit testing at this point. Once you have those choices made, go ahead and click OK. All right. First thing we're going to do is we're going to add a controller. We're starting with an empty application. So we're going to add controller by right-clicking on the controllers folder. And then instead of choosing the first option, now we are choosing the second option. So we are going to create a controller with read-write actions. I want you to notice, though, if you read off to the sidebar here, it says an MVC controller with actions to create, read, update, and delete, and list the entries in a database. Complete CRUD operations right there, folks. Okay. Go ahead and click Add. This controller will be called Employee. So we're kind of going back to that working paradigm. So employee controller. All right, then we, of course, we get an employee controller C# file. And then I want you to notice inside here, in the previous iterations when we were creating controllers, all it would create for us is the action result for index. And that's all it would put in the controller. Now notice that we have not only the index, but we have details. That's so we can list it. We have create to create a new record. We have a create, and notice the little filter here for a post. That means we're going to be sending form data that's hidden. And then that allows us to pass information to a collection. And a collection is, you can kind of think of it as sort of like an array, right? Collection of information. And then that has a built-in try-catch statement that allows us to try to, notice what we're doing is after you create, what does it try to do? Pitch it back on the home page. That's what this does. And if that doesn't work, then it just returns something else. It's just a little fail-safe just in case you haven't done it. We also get an option to edit. And then notice that we also get an edit that does the post. Now, you guys are probably wondering, why do we have 2 edits and why do we have 2? Well, the reason for that is one is the one that puts the interface on the screen that gives you the ability to edit. The second one, the one with the post, is the one that's actually sending the information. So when you hit that button to do it, that's the one that triggers. When you're putting the screen up to just see what you're doing, it's the first one, the simple one. Okay. And notice, I didn't write this code. This is all done automatically. All right. Next thing we have is the ability to delete. So the interface to delete, and then the actual action to delete. And that kind of completes the whole thing. All of it generated automatically by the scaffolding engine, just by virtue of the fact that we created it with those tools. All right, and that actually, if you're following the examples in the book, that puts us now on the middle of page 75 on step number 11. All right, the next thing that they want us to do is go to the models folder, and we want to right-click the models folder, choose add, and then at the very bottom of the dialog, select the class. So we create a new class file here in the models folder. On the page number 76, we want to make sure that we select class, and that was kind of automatically selected for us, but we do want to name that class employee. And you can type .cs in if you want. If you don't, it will add it automatically. So we are just creating an empty class file. Now some import statements are there automatically. The namespace is there automatically, as is the class declaration. But what we're going to do now inside of the class curly brackets here is we are going to add the stuff that you see on page 76 in your tutorial document, and that is these particular data fields. I want you to notice really quick that, okay, the model is employee. So this is going to build an employee table in our database. We're implying a data structure, and what we're doing is we're putting in the calls to the variables that are going to be the columns in the table. So we're going to have one for ID, and that's just a record ID in this case. It's going to be an ID for the employee, the name of the employee, and notice a weird data type of date time, the date that they actually joined, and then the age of the employee. All right, once you've created that, go ahead and do a Control S to save it so it locks in. All right. Now we're going to go into that controller file that we already created, the employee controller. And on page 77, right at the top, they want us to copy the code that's on that page. And what we're doing here is we're going to add a method that adds that code. So just in case you're wondering what it looks like, it's this stuff here. So we're going to grab everything in this box and append it to our employee controller. So I'm moving that over to do the copy paste, and then I'll kind of talk us through as we go here. And I'm trying to do the copy paste smoothly, but sometimes I find I have to almost like zoom out to get all of it in my PDF reader. So I'm copying that code. Then at the bottom of the employee controller, after all of this stuff. So I want it to go after this method. That method ends here. So I'm going to add a line. So I got 2 curly braces below if you're counting, right? And then I'm going to paste this stuff in. And oh my God, that's messy, right? Now, if you really want to be persnickety about this, it's probably not a bad idea to clean up the code. So as you listen to me babble on here, I'm actually going to do that. I'm going to clean the code up to make it look just like the book. I encourage that you guys do the same. And then you're going to see there's a pattern that you follow. So once I get the pattern kind of established here, then I'm going to kind of discuss what the pattern is. And maybe some of you will latch onto the pattern pretty quickly. You know, and what I see actually is when I do this, is some people see it right away, and some people, it takes them a while to see it. But once I have the stuff in here, I want you guys to tell me what format we're using here. Does anybody recognize it? Now, if you do have the question, does it have to be formatted like this? No, not at all. Why are we formatting like this? To make it easier for us to read. Computer doesn't have any problem, no matter how little white space you put in there, it can read it just fine. So if you're not catching on yet, you're going to notice that as I separate out all this data, that the pieces I'm putting in place here and I see something that actually might be a problem here, so I'm really curious to see if that's actually the case. And what I'm identifying actually is this little comma right here. I'm not sure that that comma is necessary, but it's not flagging it as wrong. I'm going to do a Control S to save, and you know, indeed, it did all turn green, so there's no errors there. But oh my God, stuff is underlining red. Okay, I'm trying not to have a panic attack, right? Because that's what happens in Visual Studio. Stuff starts to underline in red, and then people go into panic mode. So let's not panic. Let's start there. Do not panic. But I do want you to notice the format of the data here. First of all, notice that we're adding a bunch of information, and the filter that sits before it telling the MVC engine that we're not acting upon this per se, so we're not like executing this code, we're just providing information. And then if you notice, the format here is we are instantiating, we're creating a list, right? And a list is kind of like an array, and we're calling it get employee list. Now what's happening is we are creating, we're instantiating a new list, and what the list does is it creates new employees. So we're filling a list or an array, think of it that way, with the instantiation of new employees, and we are providing the data. And notice how the data here, right, matches up with ID, name, joining date, and age. So really what we're doing is we're creating key value pairs. And have you guys noticed the format yet? JSON, are you guys catching this? It's serialized JavaScript data in plain text. And this has really become actually kind of a standard now. And I was having this discussion earlier with Saad that JSON is really becoming the prevalent way for moving application data for the web and for really for a lot of application development. But you notice that it really is a combination of key value pairs. The keys, of course, match up with the database, and then the data on the right side will be attributed to each new employee. So we're basically creating new employees. So each new employee declaration is pulling in a new record for employee and then adding the data. And notice, isn't it interesting that the joining date, instead of like being manually entered, is going to be automatically pulled from the system. So as soon as we create it, it will drop in a timestamp to go with it. And it's just doing that automatically. Could we leave that blank and manually type it in? Sure. But in this case, we're allowing the system to generate that all on its own. What we're doing here is we're basically creating 4 records. If you want to have fun with it, you can change the names and ages and things like that. You can even change the ID numbers if you wish. That's really kind of up to you. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to just pause for a second and make sure you guys are all okay, because I want to make sure that you get the code typed in correctly. And I'm going to record that into the video, where the book is putting these closing ones on a separate line to show the separation, because you're really, each one of these entries is separated by a comma. The thing I find intriguing is, why is there a comma at the end? And you know what? Can I get rid of it, and is it okay? It appears to be. But I'm going to follow the book, right? Because you guys are. So let's see if if it doesn't work, we know where to go. But you see how the engine inside of Visual Studio, the debugging engine, is not flagging it? So that means either way is okay, in truth. All right, the next thing that we're going to do, so step number 14, which is at bottom of 77 going on to 78, is we're going to update the IndexAction method, which is inside the same file. So we're going to come up to the top, find the index method, and we're leaving the declaration alone, but we're going to change the code on the inside. The return view will stay, but first we are going to create in the format of a link query. So those of you that have done this before will recognize it at least a little bit. But we're creating a variable called employees, and then using a syntax from the link structure, we're going to say from E in get employee list. So it's recognizing the method that we just added with all that data. Then we are going to order by the ID number and select the employee. And I probably put too many blank lines in there. And then inside the view parentheses, you'll notice they have employees, like so. So make sure your code matches up. So that's the top of page 78. All right, so I know the book is about to lead us astray, but I am going to run the application. And sometimes I get a little tired of this, where they make you make the mistake first and then they fix it, because it's like extra work, but let's go ahead and do it. So it's going to run the application, and mine says there's build errors. So we don't want to run the last successful build, so that's going to do us no good. But we do still have this issue, which we need to figure out. So the question is, how do we fix that? Right, and I think at this point, when you look at all the underlines, there are issues here, clearly. But how do we fix this issue? Because all the ones that are employee are flagging, right? Now, yeah, we could. In fact, let's do that, right? I try to say it as enthusiastically as I can. And you know what? Does that fix the problem? It sure did, right? Did it create other problems in its wake? It did. So that was the fix, is to add the models. So notice that we need that library that works with models from MVC in order to trigger this stuff to happen. What I think is interesting is the book does not really show that. You're kind of left on your own to figure that out, or get a person like me to help you, right? Or at this point in your programming career, frankly, you guys are at the point where you're figuring it out, right? I'm not needing to hold your hand through it as much, which I appreciate. So do a Control S to save, try to run it again. And this time, we should get the browser window that says it failed. And the reason it's going to fail is because we didn't create a view for index. So guess what we're going to do next? Right. The resource cannot be found. Why? Because we don't have anything in the root of our application to drive an index view. So go ahead, close your browser, stop the application from running, and on to step number 16, so bottom of 78, top of page 79. And in the index method in the application, so anywhere within this block of code, right-click, add a view. Now we'll get the scaffolding piece here. And now here's where we start to make our first change. And if you'll notice, and I'm going to pull the document over from the book, or the book, or document, whatever, however you want to look at it. And I'm going to try to get both of them up on the screen at the same time here. You'll notice that, okay, they have us right-click, add view, and then you get a view box that looks different. Oops, right? So what do? Well, we will leave the view name as index. The template, they're telling us, is going to come from the list. Okay. The other piece that's different here is the model class. So where are we pulling it from? Well, chances are we're only going to have one option that we created. So we're going to pull in the model that we've generated. I don't believe they want us to use a layout page, so we're going to uncheck that, but we're going to leave the script libraries in there. Now I want you to think about, it says reference script libraries. What might you need script for if you're working with an application where you can create CRUD interactions? So you think about like a database entry, and you're going to have the ability to insert, update, delete, destroy, right? What usually goes along with a form? This is kind of a quiz. What usually goes along with a form to make sure that your form operates correctly? That you might have had in other classes to write painstakingly manually the ability to validate your form content. So here's how we do it in MVC. We check that box. How about that, right? That's the kind of coding I like. So we're going to go ahead and click Add. I'm going to get my PDF off the screen here. Now what's really fascinating about this, you know, is if you watch that little dialogue as it was running, as I struggled to move my PDF, it went ahead and built out a whole bunch of stuff for us. In fact, you'll notice that it did put in a view. And notice under the views folder how we have views employee index.cs.html, right? And it drops us right into that file. And notice a little bit of a difference here in this file that's generated. First of all, right at the very top, razor directive indicating that we are working with the simple app models. Which model? The employee model. So that is a database or a data model that we're pulling into the application. Okay, so this page operates off of it. We're not using a layout page, so that says null. So it builds out the whole page structure. And then inside here, it has a structure for the page. So let's examine it a little bit. So notice that it puts everything into a table. All right? With headers and everything. All the stuff that's being put in here is pretty easy to figure out, even though we didn't hand code it. Remember, this is generated automatically. Could we hand code it? Sure. Why you would, I have no idea. I mean, the tools do the work for you, but you still need to understand what they're doing. So what's happening here is notice that it creates a table row with the table header. So that's kind of like the titles at the top of the table. And it says HTML. This is a razor directive once again. So it's going to create the HTML to create a display name for our model, but what in the model? For the name column. And then it's going to do that for joining date, and it's going to do that for age. So these are column headers that it generated. Then, here's where the razor comes in really handy, because now we're not needing to intermingle ASP tags with HTML. We just do the razor directives, and it almost operates on a much cleaner basis. So it says for each. So that means for every entry in that table, it's going to loop through, create a table row where it's going to pull in the name, the joining date, and the age for each record. Then in addition, at the tail end of the table, notice what it does. It automatically creates action links that allow us to edit, get the details, or delete the entry that's in the table. Like, wow, right? I didn't have to code that. I love it already. That was kind of my reaction when I first did this. And I was like, where have you been all my life, right? You know, because in every other language, you guys learn the real painful way of doing it manually, right? And there is value to that, folks, because when you need to go fix something, you know what you're looking for, right? So there really is significant value to that. All right. All done automatically. I'm supposing that you guys can probably figure out what comes next, right? We would assume. And that is to run the application. So we're on step 18, bottom of page 81. And let's go ahead, be brave, and run it. And this is actually a pretty big step here that we're taking right now. So notice it's doing a little bit more work than it normally does. My browser, of course, popped up on the second screen, and it successfully pulled up the 4 entries that we manually coded and the ability to edit, to get details, or delete each one of those entries. And then on top of it, at the very top of the page, it also gives you the ability to create a new entry. Now, granted, this is ugly looking HTML, right? Because we didn't like bootstrap this. We didn't put in any of our own CSS, but you guys can easily imagine that you can change those structures. In fact, if you don't like the stuff dropping into a table, you could go ahead and create some other structure for it. It doesn't have to look like this. It doesn't have to go into that structure. That's just what's default. All right. And believe it or not, at this point, if you've accomplished this much, you're good with section 12. Now, some of you, of course, will want to click these links and see what happens, right? Well, nothing? Yeah, we haven't done anything yet. But you know, there's temptations there. All right. So go ahead, do the error. But that wraps up section 12. And we're going to take another real short pause here before we continue. All right, this video ends here, and I'm going to be moving on to section 13 in another video.